Hello, everyone. Welcome to the BarRaiser Podcast, where we discuss everything about interviewing. And today we want to discuss how can you train your interviewers. We have a very special guest with us, Arijit Saha, who is currently the CTO of Redica Systems, a company that is serving customers in healthcare. Previously, he has headed engineering teams at Noodle.ai, serving customers in the function of supply chain and logistics. And before that, was developing products at Goldman Sachs and Infosys. Welcome, Arijit. How are you doing?
Thanks, Manav. I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Great. We're going to talk a little bit about the best ways to train your interviewers, considering that you have built or and headed teams across different organizations. I'd love our, I'm sure our listeners are going to learn something about training them themselves or their interviewers in conducting the best possible interviews and making the best possible hire.
Yeah, no, I've been hiring, I think, close to 15, 16 years now. So definitely that's a topic that's very dear to my heart. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome. So, can you share some of the experiences that you have had while training interviewers or training yourself as an interviewer as well at different organizations that you've done in the past 15 years?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, I'll say it is very important to develop a structured interview process. What I mean by that is establishing a very clear, standardized process for conducting interviews. Uh, Things that you can do there is like including a list of core competencies, very specific behavioral questions for each of the role. The structure kind of helps interviewers stay on track. So that's what you can use as a training, as a preparation for the interviews, and ensure like candidates are getting a good experience and they're being assessed on their relevant skills. uh, a lot of times what I try to do is create an interview
Hmm.
playbook based on the very
Uh-huh.
role specific scorecards, which you can then share with the interviewers, which almost acts as a guideline during the process and helps keep the interview on the right path and helps establish the right expectations for the role.
Wow, interesting. And I assume a lot of heavy lifting goes into the developing these playbooks for interview.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely takes a lot of time and effort, and again depends probably on the type of the company. Probably in bigger companies where you have already established certain types of profiles, it's a different kind of challenge versus last few years I've been mostly working in startups where roles evolve and sometimes we almost end up building a job description that looks like an unicorn. So you have to be careful about that and make sure like the right expectations are set. I think another important thing that comes in mind is about like new interviewers also. So a lot of time what I've
Hmm.
seen, we have been very successful was by pairing a new interviewer with a peer, like a panel or a joint interview for the first few times. Because again every company has a very specific unique type of culture and they want to focus on certain things. So someone coming
Correct.
from outside obviously wants to bring in some of their own learnings and whatnot, but it's also important to understand the current processes so they can kind of learn from that before kind of interviewing on their own.
Sort of like a shadowing.
Yeah, because at the
Mhm.
end what you're looking for is the candidate's experience, right? So it is quite important that this is taken with importance. Like you should train all the interviewers whether they're new or even like people who have been doing for sometimes, like sometimes roles evolve or change, or you may be looking for certain specific skill sets. So kind of having that opportunity to get together, discuss about the expectations and having some sort of a playbook helps. Now saying that, obviously a lot of these are old way of doing things. uh,
Mhm.
Now with in the modern world with platforms like BarRaiser, uh, like in my last company when we used BarRaiser, we actually learned a lot just from the platform about how our interviewers conducted the interviews and use that to kind of decide what kind of training programs we should do.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. And you mentioned continuously about candidate experience, and I'm delighted to know that because here at BarRaiser, we also focus a lot on the candidate experience while delivering the interviews. But any practical tips or for our users, maybe just one or two pragmatic ones that you can use to enhance candidate experience through interview training.
Yeah, means it varies from person to person, but I think kind of making candidates feel welcome, staying within the boundaries of what's allowable, what's not allowable. Like, don't go for leading or close-ended questions. Be respectful about the time.
Hmm.
I think even like just the interviewer's preparation kind of
Uh-huh.
sometimes shows up during the interview, right? And that matters.
Right.
Like, as a candidate, I have given interviews, so if I see an interviewer coming like totally unprepared, like that's almost like insulting to me, especially when you
Right.
are interviewing for certain critical roles and whatever level it is, right? Like, you will expect the company to take you seriously, as the company expects you to take you seriously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. If I take it down further, right? So what you did in terms of interview training, but what are the most common areas where you saw interviewers tend to make a mistake when it comes to the interviews or the process itself?
Yeah, no, good question. So it goes back to the previous point that I was mentioning, which is lack of preparation. So I have
Hmm.
seen a lot of times interviewers fail to review like the job description or kind of even the candidate's resume sometimes, and that's an wasted opportunity because then you are kind of taking up a lot of the precious interview time to read through the resume and figuring out what to ask, what not to ask. Then mistakes like very leading questions or very close-ended questions. Sometimes I have seen interviewers blabbers or talks too much instead of letting the candidate speak. So I think it should be more participatory. A lot of times interviewers tend to focus on very irrelevant factors, and this is a practical example where I got to know this from the candidate after the interview, where one of the interviewer was the candidate was being interviewed for a data engineering role, but he had like a business analytics grad degree, right? So the interviewer was very focused on why did you did why did you do a data science degree and then joining data engineering, right? Why don't you try for
Right.
a data science role? And so he spent probably 15-20 minutes just kind of trying to grill on that and figuring out what's the candidate's intention is. So which is unnecessary, right? Like, if the
Hmm.
candidate is willing to do data engineering, I'm sure as an adult he knows what he or she is doing. The other thing that often comes up is after the interview, you do not get good feedback written down because a lot of times interviewers forgets like taking notes or writing down points um, during the process.
Right. And you have to give it to them. I mean, personally, I sympathize a lot with the people who interview quite a bit because it is a difficult process. There are many things, and it's a very high involvement decision making for to provide a yes or a no to a particular candidate. But
It
in terms
is.
of, yeah, as
Sorry,
a
go ahead.
follow up
Yeah.
question, I wanted to know, how did you like? Was there any means for you to provide or even revisit these conversations and then provide a feedback to the interviewer that, hey, this is what you're doing wrong, or this is where you need improvement?
Yeah, see, in an ideal world, that should be the process. But honestly, I don't know if in most cases a feedback loop to the interviewer exists, unless like there is some sort of a big blunder or some sort of escalation, or somehow maybe the recruiter found out from the candidate or the candidate proactively shared some feedback, right? And again, reason being what you were saying earlier, like the interviewers have a full time job, so a lot of times they are kind of doing this on top of their job expectations, like though this is part of their job, but most often like time is not budgeted when estimations are provided. A lot of times interviews may not be planned well ahead, so it gets scheduled during maybe a busy week and whatnot, right? So sometimes it becomes like really challenging in a real world scenario for hiring managers to find that quality time to get the team together, debrief after each interview. uh, we do try to debrief as much as we can, especially if there are red flags that are coming out of the feedback process. Like, for example, one interviewer felt like really strongly, the other one may not be, and uh, just trying to understand their viewpoints, the different kind of feedback that they had from their rounds. Again, it's not feasible all the time. Sometimes it can be done offline. Sometimes we try to just schedule a short meeting after the interview, get together, discuss about it. Now I heard about the interview assistant in BarRaiser, and how it provides feedback to the interviewers on their style. That definitely has caught my attention, so I'm looking forward to try that out, and I'll be happy to let you know how that's working out.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Arijit. Um, let's just move ahead and maybe discuss a little bit about, you know, the need to maintain a consistent interview process, which is sometimes, and quite a lot of times, people do tend to mistake consistent with, absolutely standardized, while still giving the interviewers to the flexibility to tailor their approach, right? So, as an interviewer, I have a particular style of interviewing. While I should be able to retain it, I should still provide a consistent interview process or interview experience to the candidate. Has that ever come across as a problem in training the interviewers? And if yes, how do you tackle that?
Yeah, no, it does. I think it's a delicate balance. Like, for example, we were discussing about the structured approach, right? Now, at the same
Hmm.
time, you also don't want to put too much of a structure. It should be more of a loose guideline in terms of like what what we generally follow, but at the same time give the interviewer to be a little bit more creative. I think a lot of that comes with experience, but probably what's key is situational awareness for the
Hmm.
interviewers. Uh, that you can obviously address some part of it through training. Some part comes as interviewers kind of does more and more interviews and gathers that experience. uh, but again, I think just if you have a guideline as a company, just keeping it as a guideline, like more kind of structured, but like loosely structured in the sense like just follow this path, but doesn't say like these are the exact steps you need to say. uh, Now, I personally always encourage like we should leverage technology wherever we
Hmm.
can. So now with a lot of these platforms, including yours, kind of allowing like video or video to like video recording, as well as like the AI based tools to kind of
Hmm.
analyze the interview, that
Hmm.
definitely helps in terms of ensuring at least reviewing like what the experience looks like, and how can you get to like balance between that structure, consistency, and flexibility.
Cool. Um, you have been sort of a data guy all your life, so I'm going to ask a question which mingles your interest and mine, which is data as well as analytics in the interview training process. Do you have any thoughts or have used it in the past to train your interviewers?
Yeah, again a good question. See, unless we measure something, we cannot improve, right? And
Right.
if we do not have data, the relevant data to measure the effectiveness of the interview process, like how will you even know what to improve, or how will you even feed that back to the training and other processes? Now, in earlier days, we always relied on like the candidate feedback analysis, and that used to be like one off offline. Sometimes a lot of subjectivity creeps in there,
Mm-hmm.
because even if the interviewers may not have done uh, anything wrong as such, they may have like followed good interview practices, but the candidate may have felt like they didn't do well, so that a lot of times creates negative feedback and whatnot, right? So it's difficult with some of those like subjective feedback. Again, like things like video recording and other things helps. uh, but as I was mentioning, like some of these tools now providing a lot of other metrics, right? uh, Offline, what we also look at, like the different ratios, like at the various stages of the funnel, like what's our
Mm-hmm.
rejection rate at the various stages. That kind of gives us some insight on what standards are being used. Sometimes you may find like a particular interviewer rejects more, so it's good to understand like why they feel that way, and kind of ensure like it again follows that loose guideline philosophy, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not taken like to a different level where it's becoming like an anomaly to the entire process, right? uh, Now
Makes sense.
with this newer platforms, like the analytics that it can generate, I think that can definitely help. For example, I think even in the BarRaiser platform, you have this metrics like talk to listen ratio, then
Hmm.
how like the number of interruptions by the interviewers and coverage of topics, whether it in terms of the breadth or the depth. Those kind of things definitely help improve that overall process.
Cool. And I'm quite intrigued now that like there is some sort of a framework that our listeners have on how to create an interview training process within their organization. But any thoughts on how can they measure the effectiveness of the plan that they've created?
That's another difficult challenge. Again, like it's kind of difficult to take the subjectivity out of it a lot of times, right? While you can definitely do whatever you can to improve your internal processes, gather a lot of feedback, uh, but honestly, like unless you have some sort of a baseline, it's very difficult to say whether you're doing good, bad, or kind of industry standard. uh, so unless again, like we are leveraging data, we are leveraging internal intelligent platforms, this is a difficult thing to do. So I don't think like in traditional ways how we have done interviews earlier, like this was possible,
Hmm.
because again you were just historically were relied on the candidate and the interviewer's feedback, uh, to understand how the process is going and whatnot. Um, but now that with some of this modern platform, one thing that I can think of is like if you have some sort of benchmarks available, and if you
Hmm.
have like more generic like similar type of companies and analytics kind of available from those companies that you can compare and contrast, that can be definitely a good way of doing it. uh, it's a hard problem, but I'm hoping like platform like yours will help solve this.
Oh, definitely, and that's where we talk about bringing in intelligence in interview process, where this intelligence is collecting a lot of data, not just about the conversation, about the candidate, about the interviewer, and bringing it together in a flavor where one can not just take actions in terms of interview training, but can also measure the efficacy of the plan or the structures or the way they have interviewed or the process in totality.
Mhm.
So great. I think Arijit, it was a very very insightful conversation, and I'm sure our listeners find this conversation valuable, especially when they are trying to set up something for their own interview training or training the interviewers in their team. And I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion in the future episodes as well, because I'd love to see how Redica uses and brings about that change once they introduce interview intelligence in their process.
Thank you, Manav. It was great chatting with you today, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Arijit. Thank you so much.